Strange facts about Johnny Carson's last show. On May 22nd, 1992, America said goodbye to the man who had been on TV with them for 30 years. Johnny Carson's last episode of The Tonight Show wasn't just a TV show ending. It was the end of a special time that would never happen again. Over 55 million people watched, making it one of the most watched TV moments ever. But behind the tears, the clapping, and Carson's quiet goodbye, there were hidden things, last-minute changes, and backstage problems that nobody knew about until years later. The final show that looked so smooth on TV was actually full of secret choices, people crying, and carefully kept plans that almost went wrong many times. What the cameras showed that night was only about 60% of what really happened, said a person who used to work at NBC and was there for the finale. The rest, the fights, the surprise guests who weren't allowed in, the video that was destroyed on purpose afterward, that's the story that's never been completely told. Today, we're showing you the strange, surprising, and sometimes shocking truth about Johnny Carson's famous last show. The secret story of TV's most famous goodbye, from the famous people who weren't allowed to come to the emotional breakdown that almost ruined the whole thing. These are the hidden stories that change how we understand an important moment in American TV history. But first, let's talk about the biggest secret of all. The real reason Carson picked May 22nd as his final date. A choice connected to something sad that shaped how he said goodbye. All we have is tonight and tomorrow, and I'm gone. God, I number 10. The mysterious timing decision. Johnny Carson announced he was retiring almost a year before his final show, giving NBC lots of time to get ready for this huge TV event. But picking May 22, 1992, as the final show date confused network bosses who wanted a finale during the more valuable February ratings period when they decide how much to charge for commercials. Johnny usually listened to business stuff, explained someone who used to work at NBC on scheduling, but with the final date, he wouldn't budge. May 22nd couldn't be changed, and he wouldn't explain why to anyone except Fred DeCordova, the show's producer. Why this date was special stayed a mystery until years after Carson died, when his longtime friend and lawyer, Henry Bushkin, revealed the sad truth. May 22nd was the birthday of Carson's son, Richard, who had died in a car crash in 1991. The finale was Carson's private way of honoring his son, something he kept secret from almost everyone who worked on the show. Johnny never liked showing his feelings in public, Bushkin explained in a later interview. Making the finale happen on Richard's birthday was his way of making the day special and personal, while keeping his private life private. It was just like how he dealt with sad things, doing it in ways only he really understood. This private memorial added touching meaning to Carson's famously calm farewell. While viewers saw him get emotional but stay composed on TV, they had no idea that the date itself meant something so deeply personal. A hidden layer of meaning that Carson purposely kept between himself and his closest friends. Looking back, knowing what the date meant helps explain why Johnny was so unusually involved with every detail of the final show, said someone who worked on the show. This wasn't just a work milestone for him. It was mixed together with the saddest loss of his personal life. In this, in this business, there are comedians, there are comics, and once in a while, number 9, the secret final guest that never happened. The final episode of The Tonight Show, starring Johnny Carson, had Robin Williams and Bette Midler as the last official guests, something TV fans know well. What few people know is that another surprise guest had been secretly planned to appear after Midler, but was cut at Carson's direct order just hours before the show. There was a planned final surprise guest that would have been historic TV, said someone who used to work at NBC as a page that night. The staircases on both sides of the stage were kept empty, security was doubled, and there was a separate dressing room set up that none of the regular workers could go into. According to many people who were there that night, the mystery guest was former President Ronald Reagan, who had been secretly brought to the studio through an underground parking entrance. The plan was for Reagan to make a surprise appearance during the final part of the show, giving Carson a Presidential Medal of Freedom, something arranged without NBC knowing through private connections. The medal was real. It had been approved through official channels, but the presentation was supposed to be a total surprise. Set up between Reagan's people and a couple of Carson's most trusted workers, explained someone who used to work at the White House and knew about the plan. The network wasn't told because Johnny wanted real surprise from everyone involved. The planned appearance was canceled about 3 hours before taping when Carson found out about it. According to people who were there, he was clearly upset that others had tried to plan a surprise for his carefully organized final show. Johnny called Fred de Cordova and said, "Get him out of here. This is not a political convention, and I'm not taking medals from anyone tonight," remembered someone who worked on the show and heard the conversation. He insisted that his farewell would be done his way, personal, low-key, and focused on his relationship with the viewers, not on getting awards. Reagan was quietly taken out of the building, and the medal was given to Carson later at his home privately. What happened showed Carson's famous need to control his public image and his discomfort with big fancy displays. These were qualities that had defined his 30-year run as TV's most powerful star. Probably 10,000 pieces a week. Alex didn't talk to you about this issue. Number 8. The missing footage controversy. One of the strangest things about Carson's final show was what happened to the video after it aired. While most famous TV moments are saved with multiple backup copies, big chunks of the raw footage from Carson's finale were deliberately destroyed within days of the show, an almost unheard-of decision for such a historic TV event. There were 5 cameras recording that night, which was normal for the show, explained someone who used to work at NBC keeping track of videos. But what wasn't normal was what happened afterward. 3 days after the show, orders came down to destroy all the raw footage, except for one edited master copy. Multiple camera angles, pre-show material, stuff from commercial breaks, all of it was erased. This unusual destruction was ordered directly by Carson himself, through his production company, Carson Productions, which owned the rights to the program. According to people who knew about the decision, Carson was worried about people making documentaries or looking back shows using footage of him being emotional in ways that didn't make the final show. There were times during commercial breaks where Johnny was clearly emotional, a side of himself he never wanted people to see, said a camera operator who worked the final show. There was one moment in particular after Midler's performance where he had to take almost 2 minutes to calm himself down before continuing. He insisted that those moments stayed private. Destroying the footage has created a weird situation where one of TV's most important moments only exists in the version that aired with no different angles or extra footage available, even for history books. NBC people who keep track of videos have confirmed that the only surviving footage is the exact program as it aired, plus about 15 minutes of Ed McMahon's unedited introduction. "It's unheard of for a TV event this big," said someone who studies TV history. Even the moon landing has more surviving raw footage than Carson's farewell. It shows his extraordinary power at NBC and his extreme need to control how the public saw him, even after he left TV completely. Number 7. The Doc Severinsen collapse. Doc Severinsen's bright outfits and loud trumpet had been part of The Tonight Show for decades. As band leader, he was part of Carson's inner circle and one of the host's closest friends off-camera. What viewers of the final show never knew was that Severinsen had a partial physical collapse hours before the show that almost stopped him from appearing at all. Doc had been awake for almost 48 hours straight, practicing special music arrangements and trying to perfect the music for Johnny's Goodbye, said a musician who played in the Tonight Show band. Around noon on the day of the final taping, he just collapsed in the rehearsal room. A combination of being exhausted, emotional, and the huge pressure everyone felt to make the final show perfect. NBC's medical workers checked Severinsen and strongly told him not to perform that night, suggesting that assistant conductor Tommy Newsom take his place. According to people who were there, Severinsen refused the medical advice and didn't even let Carson know what happened. He told the doctor, "Unless I'm dead, I'm leading that band tonight." Johnny doesn't need one more thing to worry about, remembered someone who worked on the show and saw the conversation. Then he asked for a B12 shot, took a 2-hour nap in his dressing room, and somehow got himself together for the show. Viewers who watch the final show can see small signs of Severinsen's condition. He stays sitting more than usual during the show and lets other band members play trumpet solos. However, his colorful presence and the band's performance showed no sign of the drama that had happened hours earlier. Doc's performance that night, considering how he felt physically, was one of the most amazing displays of being professional I've ever seen, said another musician. He was literally running on empty and pure willpower, determined not to let Johnny down on the most important night of their 30-year partnership. Severinsen never talked about this publicly, believing that people should focus on Carson's farewell rather than his own behind-the-scenes struggle. This loyalty was typical of the close team Carson had built during his 3 decades on air, a group that made protecting their leader a priority even at personal cost. I've been a big fan of Jay Leno since the very first time he appeared on The Tonight Show. What was it, some 8-9 years ago? I guess maybe 10 years ago. Staff number 6, the Johnny Carson-Jay Leno backstage tension. While the on-air transition from Johnny Carson to Jay Leno looked friendly to viewers, the backstage reality during the final shows was full of tension, awkward encounters, and careful scheduling to keep the outgoing and incoming hosts separated whenever possible. There was a complicated dance happening behind the scenes, said an NBC page who worked both shows during the transition period. The production team basically created separate paths through the studio so Johnny and Jay wouldn't accidentally bump into each other. Different elevators, different hallways, different green rooms. It was like running 2 separate worlds in the same building. This careful separation came from Carson's well-known disappointment that NBC had chosen Leno rather than David Letterman as his replacement. Though Carson never publicly criticized the decision, everyone in the industry knew he preferred Letterman, creating an uncomfortable situation during the handover. Johnny was perfectly professional on camera, but off camera he made his feelings clear through small actions, explained a stage manager who worked the final week. He never once said Leno's name during production meetings. When talking about the future, he would only say, "the next guy," or "whoever follows." It was pointed but subtle, classic Carson. According to many sources, the tension reached its peak in TKV2, an uncomfortable encounter just hours before the final show when Leno tried to visit Carson's dressing room to wish him well. Carson's longtime assistant, Helen Sanders, reportedly stopped Leno in the hallway. Helen stopped him and said, "Johnny's preparing and doesn't want to be disturbed," remembered someone who worked on the show and saw what happened. Then she added, "Perhaps tonight isn't the best night for this conversation." Jay understood right away and left without arguing. It was awkward, but handled with the privacy that characterized everything around Carson. This behind-the-scenes tension added touching context to Carson's decision not to make a single appearance on The Tonight Show after he retired, despite being invited many times by Leno. Carson's true feelings about who should replace him were finally confirmed after he died, when people found out he had been regularly sending jokes to David Letterman to use in his monologues on the competing CBS show. A quiet but clear statement about where his loyalty was. Number 5, the standing ovation that almost didn't happen. The long standing ovation that opened Carson's final show. A natural display of emotion from the audience that lasted nearly 2 minutes and clearly moved the usually calm host. Almost didn't happen because of an unusual request from Carson himself that was ultimately ignored by his production team. 3 days before the final show, Johnny asked that the audience be specifically told not to give him a standing ovation at the beginning, said someone who used to coordinate audiences for the program. He said he was worried it would start the show on such an emotional note that he might not be able to get through the rest of it. He wanted to save that moment for the end. This request put Carson's team in an uncomfortable position. They understood his worries, but also knew that stopping such a natural reaction from the audience would make the show feel fake and too controlled. Fred de Cordova made the decision to simply ignore Johnny's request, explained someone who worked on the finale. He never told the audience coordinators to give those instructions, betting that Johnny would ultimately appreciate a real reaction over a fake one, even if it made things harder for him emotionally. When Carson came out from behind the curtain to the loud extended ovation, his surprise was real. He had expected the audience to stay seated until the end of the show. This real moment of being caught off guard added to the emotional power of the opening as viewers watched Carson struggle to keep his composure in the face of such an outpouring of love. Johnny gave Fred a look when he finally made it to the desk that said, "You didn't listen to me," remembered a camera operator positioned to capture Carson's reaction. But after the show, he admitted it was the right choice. He told a few of us, "I thought I knew what was best after 30 years. But I was wrong. That was exactly how it should have started." This behind-the-scenes decision to allow an uncontrolled, real, emotional moment rather than following Carson's preference for holding back created one of the most memorable openings in TV history and set the tone for a farewell that balanced Carson's desire for dignity with the real emotion such a huge occasion deserved. I can't believe the last guest, the last fool, Mr. Carson will have to suffer gladly. Number 4. Bette Midler's Secret Rehearsal Marathon. Bette Midler's emotional performance of One for My Baby and One More for the Road is remembered as one of the most touching moments in TV history, a perfect farewell that brought Carson close to tears. What viewers don't know is the extraordinary lengths Midler went to behind the scenes, including a tough 36-hour rehearsal process that almost caused her to lose her voice before the actual show. Bette was absolutely determined that this would be the performance of her lifetime, said a musical director who worked with her on the preparation. She rented a private rehearsal space 3 days before the show and basically moved in. She had a cot brought in so she could take short naps between rehearsal sessions without leaving. According to many sources, Midler worked with 5 different arrangers, continuously improving the performance and rejecting many approaches before finding the personal, emotionally powerful version that finally aired. She reportedly went through 18 different arrangements of the song before settling on the final version. By the morning of the show, her voice was almost gone from all the rehearsing, explained a vocal coach who was brought in to help. "We had to put her on vocal rest for 6 hours before the taping with a strict plan of steam treatments and herbal remedies to try to get her voice back in time. It was genuinely touch and go whether she'd be able to perform at all." This background makes Midler's perfect delivery even more amazing. She was performing with a voice that had been pushed to its complete limits through obsessive preparation. The emotional crack in her voice during the final lines that seems like natural emotion was, according to people involved, partly the result of her vocal exhaustion. What makes it even more extraordinary is that Bette never told Johnny about any of this, said someone who worked with both stars. He had no idea about the rehearsal marathon or the voice problems. She was determined that he experienced her performance without any worry for her or knowledge of the work behind it. It was a gift in the purest sense. She nearly broke herself to create a perfect moment for someone else. This information adds new meaning to Carson's clearly moved reaction. He was responding not just to the song's emotional power, but to an act of artistic dedication far beyond what would be expected even for such an important TV moment. Well, I made it through that first night with the help of Groucho Marx, Rudy Vive. Number 3. The destroyed celebrity messages. One of the most tightly guarded secrets about Carson's final show was the existence of a special segment that was fully made but never aired. A compilation of farewell messages from dozens of major celebrities and political figures that Carson personally watched and then ordered destroyed without airing. It was a huge undertaking, said a producer who worked on the segment. We spent months gathering custom video messages from everyone from Presidents Nixon, Ford, Carter, and Bush to movie stars like Jack Nicholson, Meryl Streep, and Tom Hanks. The final put-together piece ran about 12 minutes and would have been the most star-filled tribute in TV history. The segment was finished a week before the final show and privately shown to Carson in his office. According to people who were there, he watched it in silence, thanked the team for their work, and then surprised everyone with his response. Johnny watched the whole thing, nodded, and then said, "It's very nice. Now lock it in the vault. We're not using it," remembered an editor who worked on the project. When people asked why, he simply said, "That's not what this night is about." After the final show, Carson went further, asking that all copies of the tribute be destroyed rather than saved in the archives. According to internal NBC memos that have since become public, his specific instruction was that the material not be used in any future tributes, looking back shows, or memorial programs under any circumstances. "It was heartbreaking to destroy something so many people had contributed to," admitted the producer. "We had responses from 5 continents and dozens of the most famous people in the world." But Johnny was clear. He wanted his farewell to focus on his relationship with the audience and his core team, not on celebrity connections. This decision showed Carson's famous dislike of the Hollywood celebrity culture, despite his position at its center. By rejecting the star-filled tribute, he stuck to his long-standing belief that his connection to ordinary viewers was more important than his relationships with famous guests, a principle that had guided his approach to TV throughout his 30-year run. Johnny figured, and with the court of any other folks involved, Peter Alley, he figured that number 2, Ed McMahon's emotional breakdown. Ed McMahon's trademark laugh and constant support had been there throughout Carson's 30-year run on camera during the final show. McMahon kept his professional composure despite visible emotion. What viewers never saw was the complete emotional breakdown he had backstage that required medical help and nearly stopped him from appearing in the final parts of the show. Ed had been holding it together really well until the final commercial break before Johnny's farewell remarks, said a stage manager who was there that night. He stepped backstage for a moment and something just broke. He collapsed into tears so bad that he was having trouble breathing. It was the kind of uncontrollable crying you rarely see from a grown man, especially someone with Ed's military background and professional control. The breakdown was so bad that NBC's on-site medical workers became worried about McMahon's blood pressure and at first advised that he not return to the stage for the final segment. This created a crisis for the production team, who knew Carson would never end the show without his longtime sidekick beside him. Johnny had no idea this was happening. He was looking over his notes for the final remarks, explained someone who worked on the show. Fred DeCordova was desperately trying to manage the situation without alarming Johnny. There was real panic that we might have to delay the final segment or somehow change it without Ed. McMahon ultimately went against medical advice, using cold compresses on his face and eyes to reduce the swelling from crying. A makeup artist did what one witness described as a miracle job to hide the evidence of his breakdown before he returned to the set for the final moments of the show. What you see in those final minutes is Ed McMahon using every bit of his professional skill to stay composed, observed a colleague who saw both the breakdown and the show. He's literally holding himself together by pure will. If you look closely during Johnny's final remarks, You can see Ed's hands shaking despite his calm facial expression. This background adds touching depth to the final moments between Carson and McMahon, a professional partnership that had lasted 3 decades and ended, with both men using extraordinary self-control to give the audience a farewell that felt dignified rather than overly sad despite the overwhelming emotion they were feeling privately. Number 1. Johnny's secret final words. The most closely guarded secret about Carson's final show concerns what happened after the cameras stopped rolling. The unbroadcast final moments in the studio, and Carson's actual last words to his staff, which were very different from his famously understated on-air farewell. What people don't realize is that Johnny's actual final words weren't, "I bid you a very heartfelt good night," said a camera operator who was on set that night. After the show ended, the audience stayed seated, and Johnny stepped back to center stage for a private moment with just the crew and staff. What he said there was never broadcast and never meant for the public. According to many sources who were there, after the cameras stopped rolling, Carson asked the audience to stay seated and requested that all network executives leave the studio, an unheard-of request that was still honored given the circumstances. Once only his direct staff, crew members, and the audience remained, Carson spoke for about 3 minutes without cameras recording. He said things he would never have said on air, remembered a longtime staff writer. He talked about how TV had changed during his time, not all for the better. He admitted that his leaving marked the end of a time when a host could speak to America without focus groups and corporate oversight. And then he said something that shocked everyone. "I hope I earned this privilege every night. I hope I never took your trust for granted. And I hope to God they remember what this was before it's all shopping channels and shouting matches." According to people who were there, Carson then did something completely unlike him. He invited his entire staff and crew onto the stage for a group hug, abandoning the emotional distance he had kept throughout the show. This private moment of vulnerability and connection was only seen by those in the studio that night. "He made us all promise not to record it or talk about it publicly until after he was gone," explained someone who worked on the show. He said, "Tonight was for the viewers. This moment is for us." It was Johnny showing us a side of himself that he purposely kept hidden from the public eye throughout his career. This final unrecorded moment revealed the complex reality behind Carson's public persona. A man who kept a careful distance on camera while caring deeply about the quality of TV and the people who helped create his show. It was, in the words of one witness, the real farewell, the one without the mask he wore so comfortably for 30 years.